Yeah, just like, whoa.
That is hot.
Yeah, let's, it's not hot anymore. It doesn't fit. It's the same one. Is it this one?
Welcome back to video 4 of Eriks V8 swap. This video we're going to mount the battery box, the air box, and finish up the wiring. We're going to prep the Holley Sniper intake. Then we will fill all the fluids, prime the engine oil, and start the engine for the first time. After that we will finish up the radiator mounting and all the coolers. Lastly we will wire up the Camaro fan controller and get this thing ready to get on the road. So let's go ahead and get started with the battery box. Most everything is plugged in. Coil packs are plugged in, and then we'll do the injectors once we put the intake manifold on. Still need to tap the Holley Sniper. So now that we have everything plugged in, we can hold all these wires and mount the Jeep Speed Shop battery box. So all the wiring harness will feed from inside here. Pull it all off of the inner fender. And then we can mount the Tip'em box. We inserted these nut circs here. That way it's easier to mount that kit. Then we can put the intake adapter on and bolt that down. And then next we're going to start with prepping the Holley Sniper intake. Here we are on the bottom side of the Holley Sniper air intake. Getting all these fittings plugged in here. You got the biggest one, you got one a little bit smaller. This is what we're going to hook up to the brake booster, the one that's a little bit smaller. Next one will be for the EVAPs. And then this one will be the PVC where it'll come out. And we'll have to drill and tap a hole on this side. And we'll use this 90-degree fitting. So make sure you use some thread tape when you're putting these in the holes. So now we are drilling and tapping to put this fitting on the other side. So we'll drill and then we'll flip it over and tap the other side. Now that we got the hole drilled, we're going to remove the fuel rail. That way we can tap it from the top side. Then we've got this 90-degree fitting. We have it off to the side because you're going to have to get a bolt in here. So it'll go here and then it'll go inside. And it will attach right here to the smaller barbed fitting. This center one is going to be for the EVAP. And then this third one is going to hook up to your brake booster. Put a plug in for the fourth one. This is plug that's going to be here on the oil filler neck. That's going to go into the oil catch can. And then on the other side of the oil catch can will be this intake fitting right here. When switching to the Holley Sniper, you need to take off the map sensor off the top here, and that will go on the back of the new intake. This is the actual short runner valve. That does not come off. Only the map sensor comes off and goes that. And that is all you'll use from this intake besides your injectors. And here's the original map sensor on the back of the new intake. And then you got the fuel line here. This is the AN fitting. Front fuel line, those just bolt together. And then normally the injectors are a little bit too short, but we were able to get an injector spacer. That way you don't have to actually trim these down at all. These little posts get the spacer and it lowers the injector and it all fits perfectly. So we got the intake manifold sitting on here, and we are going to be using AN fittings to make the fuel lines. So we've got the line right here. We've got a 90-degree fitting on it. 90-degree will be at the end here. It'll go straight down into the fuel tank. Other end of this line will have this adapter that goes from the AN line to the fuel tank. So we got our fuel line length that we needed. So then we're going to take a cutoff wheel just to cut it. You can't use regular side cuts. First put this end on the hose. A lot of these thread on lefty-loosey first. Bottom it out, and then you take your other end, put some lube on it. It screws into the hole. And that one is righty-tighty. Take your AN wrenches. Yep. I think I went too tight. It's a little bit off. Dang it. And then we're gonna screw in this adapter here. And here we have a homemade AN fuel line. If you have the regular intake manifold, you can use the fuel line from Jeep Speed Shop, which is this guy right here. But since we have the Holley Sniper intake, we already had an AN fitting at the end of the intake manifold. So we made our own with AN fittings. Here is the emissions EVAP here, and this will go right on this little nub here. We are going to have to extend these wires for the plug. And then we'll run all the EVAP lines, and then we're going to run all the ground and positive battery cables. We're going to be using this battery cable kit. Usually you could use the factory battery cables from the original motor. So this is what we're going to be using. So everyone's battery cables will be a little bit different, but I'll show you what we do once we get them all installed. Also, I found out this plug here for this sensor next to the alternator, you can squeeze it down on the right side to plug it in and get the plug all the way down here. If you come on the outside, it'll be really close to the pulley. So that way those wires are tucked in there nicely. So we're getting ready to do this EVAP line. And we've got the factory one from the 3.8. It's shoved down here. We cut it to where we'll have a different hose attached to it, and then it'll attach to the other fitting right here. That way it's not sitting up on top like it's would if you kept it all factory hose. And that goes down to the gas tank right here. And then this side will come right here and a route under and attach to one of the fittings on the bottom side of the intake.
Alright, gotta plug this in right here. There we go. It's nice, high and tight. Just get it around that O2 sensor. Perfect. And we can zip tie it up there with the other stuff. Yeah, so it'll go right up there. Will be zip tied. Be nice, high and tight, out of the way.
So this is the finished EVAP line coming from the gas tank. And that'll go on the bottom side. And then this top side will go right here. Before final installation of the intake, we're going to do a couple things first. So now we are installing the power steering pump here. This is a PSC V8 swap pump, but the 3.8 pump I believe should work. I know the same pump for my 3.6 is basically identical to this one. PSC sells you a little spacer. I ended up getting a washer from the hardware store and making it this identical size. So we'll have to get a little bit longer bolts, and then we'll use this little bracket here to push the power steering pump out a little bit. Depending on which accessory drive you have, you may or may not need the spacer. And if you're using the PSC pump, you'll utilize these fittings. If you're using a Jeep PSC pump, you'll end up just buying this 45-degree fitting like I had to adapt it to the reservoir. Getting a little further, got the AC compressor on here. You have to shave off this part of it right here, and then you'll find a bolt that'll fit back here. You don't have to shave this much off, we just do. It gives a lot more clearance. And then everyone's will look a little different. Like he has the hydraulic assist, so we had to adjust the lines a little bit. This is one of the new lines that Jeep Speed Shop sells, and then the second one is another one from Jeep Speed Shop. This front one, you switch out the actual high pressure sensor from your original lines, and this will go up to the condenser. And then the fat one here is the one from Jeep Speed Shop, and that kind of gets angled downward, down under these lines into the pump. You will have to sort of bend them around a little bit, except I don't have to bend them too much to make this fit. You will have to bend these around depending on what exhaust setup you're running, but everything's fairly close. What I would say is put the condenser in place and know where these lines need to go before you do any bending. That way you can bend it only one time and Don't overbend it. Then we can go through and tighten all these fittings on the AC compressor, and then we will put on the pulley for the pump. Like again, this is the PSC pump. This is this line here, the high pressure line, came with the PSC pump for the V8 swap. There is a line on the BOM that works just fine. I'll show you guys that on mine. That's what I use on my Jeep. This is the pulley that came in the PSC kit with the Grand Cherokee accessory drive, and same with the Charger accessory drive. This pulley does not work. But if you get the one that comes from a 2014 Charger, I will put the part number. We just got it from O'Reilly's for $30. That will fit on there and line up perfectly. If you have a different accessory drive, the other pulley would probably work, but this pulley is what will work for this accessory drive. It sticks out a little bit further. There'll be a little bit less space between the fan and the front accessories. So we are putting the power steering pump on. You have to align it with the other pulleys. What you can do is put a straight edge on the AC compressor and line it up with this pulley, taking your measurement from the first inside of the rib, not the actual face of the pulley, or else it'll be different.
Okay.
Alright, so I'm taking these calipers and I'm measuring from the inside of the first rib to the edge of the actual pulley. And if you take it to this one, you can see this pulley is a little bit, the lip is not as big. So then you take it, the actual pulley, and the inside of this caliper needs to match up with the yellow here to make it so the inside lip is all the same spec. Because if you go off the outer edge, this pulley would actually be too far out because this lip here is not as big as this lip here. So you gotta use the actual measure from the inside of the grooves. We got the power steering all bolted down, 18 foot-pounds. Got the AC lines done up. Now we are running battery cables. And this one comes with a little fuse block. Alright, next we're going to do these transmission lines. These are already from the 392 JL, so they do bolt up nicely. So these lines will get bolted up right here and up in one of the oil pan bolts. And they are just nice and tight. And with the 392, the alternator's on this side, so we'll end up cutting these lines and then feeding them into the transmission cooler. So we are modifying the JL 392 transmission cooler lines. We're going to cut it so they're pointing straight up. We'll flare the ends and put on hoses and hose clamps. And then they'll come up, come through here and attach to this cooler. And I'm using this brake tool just to put a tiny little flare, that way the hose doesn't pop off this line. So we actually cut it back a little further. We're going to put these double-ended barb fittings in here. That way the hose will just fit right to there. A little nicer instead of using the flared ends, instead of putting the hose on the end here. Let's get rid of all this. Alright, this is the Northern Radiator. When you have this motor with the alternator on the lower side, the radiator hose kind of comes out and comes nice and close to it. So we're going to cut off about an inch, a little more than an inch off of it, and we'll use these to add a new flare on it. That way it holds the hose on there. These are from Harbor Freight to create a new flare. Just do a little bit and go around. Puts a nice little bubble. If you have the other alternator or the alternator relocated, you don't need to worry about this. So next we're going to install the intake manifold for the final installation. To hold these lower gaskets on here, we had to add a little bit of RTV. That way it prevents it from falling out as soon as we flip the whole thing over. So we got the intake set on here. very gently. Got the brake booster hooked up on the bottom. Had one person hold this while I hooked up the brake booster cable. And then this Holley Sniper comes with bolts over here, because they are going to be different bolts than your regular intake manifold. And then also comes with gaskets, and it comes with a throttle body gasket. That's different from the stock throttle body gasket. And then we had to purchase new bolts because it won't use the stock bolts also. We'll follow the torquing sequence to torque this down. So here's the sequence, and we'll tighten it down to 9 foot-pounds. So the intake is on. Got the fuel lines here. Got the EVAP all hooked up. The bottom of the EVAP goes down to the fuel tank. This side of the EVAP goes to the intake manifold and the plug here.
Don't plug in your injectors until after you prime the engine.
Plug in the map sensor, and then it's time to plug into the throttle body.
So now it's time to install the grill and the radiator. And watch out for pinched fingers.
Oop, you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. It's just skin.
That's nothing. Here, this is the wire for the headlights on the other side. That'll come up from the top, and it'll feed, and it'll go connect under here. And then this is the fog lights will go down underneath over. So you have to separate the radiator a little bit to get it in there.
Depending on your setup, these wires could be routed a little bit differently.
We are measuring our transmission lines for the transmission cooler and cutting those, and the power steering cooler on this side, feeding them through. You want to make sure you keep these little plastic pieces on the side, and then also you want to make sure that you keep your top plastic piece, that way air doesn't come blow up through here. So we'll keep putting things together. So we're doing the radiator hoses. It's a little tight in here. You can see the alternator pulley is close. So I actually went to AutoZone a while ago with my Jeep and found a hose that actually works good. So this is the part number for the hose from AutoZone, different than what is recommended on the BOM. And we just need to trim it up a little bit. If you don't have the alternator here, then you can use whatever hose is recommended on the BOM or whatever fits. You can still use the BOM hose, but this one is locally available at AutoZone, so easier to get a hold of.
And here I am measuring to cut the hose. And this hose will need cut on both ends, same with the hose from the BOM.
So we got this hose trimmed down a little bit. You can see there's a lot of space now. And we need to trim down this portion. And you will cut a little bit off of one end. This will plug into the radiator. And then you will cut right here, and that'll plug into the actual motor.
Depending on what motor mounts you're using, it could also change the location of your motor and how close your alternator pulley is to your radiator. Each setup will be a little bit different. But with our setup, you can see there is plenty of space, and this is with the weld-in mounts at the highest setting. On Erik's Jeep and my Jeep, we also put 2 hose clamps on the motor side, because those are very difficult to get to and they are prone to leaking. And also those clamps are difficult to get to once everything is put together.
And then I've got this hose clamp right here. That'll end up near the alternator. That way this hose can get pinched and be not as close to the alternator pulley. So then we'll move the radiator in and mount up this last hose. And now it's time to fill the engine with oil. Alright, now it's time to fill up the transmission. And we're going to be just using this little transfer pump here. A couple things you need to do before your first test fire. We like to have everything plugged in, all your ABS sensors, airbag sensors, everything essentially plugged in. And then you need to fill the engine up with engine oil. And then we have all the injectors unplugged. That way we can turn the motor over and prime it of engine oil. That way you're not starting it up with a dry system. So we'll crank the starter for a good minute or so, and then it'll be ready to test fire. Also, you'll want to fill up the transmission with transmission fluid. Probably take 4 or 5 quarts while it's not running. And then once you have everything running, then you can do your actual fill procedure. And now we're going to be using the JScan app. That way we can do a throttle relearn. So you want to do a throttle relearn. I'm using the JScan app. You go to a 2014 to 18 Jeep Grand Cherokee. Then you're going to hit go. And it should start. You might have to hit the gas pedal, I'll tell you. So now we are going to prime the engine. So we're going to have the injectors unplugged, and we're going to turn the motor over for about 15 seconds.
And the serpentine belt is not installed.
See what it does. Alright. So then give it a second. We'll do this probably three times, just to give it enough time not to overheat the starter, but then also to get engine oil everywhere.
Okay, you put the cap back on.
Yeah, it wouldn't matter. But go ahead, do it again.
Okay.
So now we can plug in these injectors and get ready to start. You'll want to look for any type of fuel leakage also before you start it. So just go through and check everything out. Hang on.
Ready?
It starts.
Yes. 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 Oh man.
She starts, she purrs.
It sounded good.
I
It
guess.
sounded good.
Yeah.
Oh. I'm gonna change. Oh. That is a long time coming.
Very nice.
A little bit of seepage of fuel.
Fuel seeping?
Tighten this up a top. Check every other areas too.
Go down under. Oh. I don't see any fuel coming down from this side.
Alright, one of the next things you can do is flush your power steering pump. I got this electric ratchet, and with the PSC you can fit this tool in there and actually spin it. That way you're not spinning a dry pump first with the motor. So use this, spin it, and get the fluid going, and then you'll be one step closer. Alright, so we've got the Camaro fan here. This is a homemade fan shroud. We kind of modified the original Camaro fan shroud and modified the Jeep 3.8 aftermarket fan shroud, and that works good. No clearance issues there at all. We didn't have to push the grill out forward at all. And then we've got, this is the Jeep Speed Shop air box and the battery box. And I would say after doing 2 swaps, I definitely recommend just going right and getting their air box. Just makes installing a lot easier. If you are not using the Holley Sniper, the 392 intake comes out towards the driver's side, and I'll show you on my Jeep how that ended up. But with the Holley Sniper, you can keep it on the factory passenger side and it just looks nice and clean. These are radiator hoses, and there's a good amount of space in between there. And then this is the stamped steel 6.1 headers, and there's still space in between the frame. Now we're going to be filling up the coolant system. Made sure it was thoroughly flushed because you don't want to mix different types of coolant. And we're going to be using this 10-year coolant used in like 2013 and newer. So if you got an older Jeep, make sure you really flush out the heater core before putting this coolant in there. So we got this coolant overflow reservoir. It's got the connection on the bottom of it, and then this front piece will just be the breather hose. And we're just letting it burp its way out. We are using the Mishimoto 180-degree thermostat. We are in lovely Arizona, so it does get hot here. I've had great success with my Jeep running that thermostat.
I ran one on the 3.8 and it was a fantastic.
Absolutely. With using the Camaro fan, you can change the settings easily. If you're not using the Camaro fan, if you're using like the NAG 1 fan, you just have to go through and change the tune settings. That way the fan comes on a little bit earlier. But with the Lingenfelter, we'll be able to adjust the settings a little bit easier. This is tuned by Jeep Speed Shop, made specifically from Lingenfelter for them. So everything should be set up good, but you can change when your high and low comes on. And then with this, we'll have to tap into one of the AC lines also. That way the fan will come on low speed once the AC is running. All right, so now we're gonna get ready to bolt this in and wire it up. We are going to mount it under the steering column here because these do not do good with the temperatures of the engine compartment, and they're not really waterproof. So we'll get mounted here. We'll use this bolt as our ground, and then we actually used our ignition power right off the ignition to power the transmission. Jeep Speed Shop does recommend tapping into the TIPM with using little fuse taps. That is always a good option. This is a little bit more of a higher risk, nice reward option here. It'll be nice and clean, ground, power. And then the other wires that we're going to be tapping into, the white wire will tap into the positive side of the air compressor. The brown and purple wires will go into the sensor that is on top of the water pump. And the BOM, it's a GM sensor, and that is on the build materials. I'll put the part number also in the Google Drive. Red wire is going to be your fuse 12 volts. Keyed power. We'll just tap it right into the ignition wiring. We've got the pink with the white tracer. That's going to be your keyed power. And then the yellow will go into the actual fan. So you won't be using the orange, blue, or gray wire. Let's go over here and get these wirings made up. Erik's got a lot of different colors here, so that makes it nice.
Oh.
We're going to start with the wiring of this sensor. And then this is where the fan wire will go to. The yellow plug will go here. The sensor plugs will be the brown and purple. And then we'll route them up here, this way. Go around here. Up, and then it'll attach to the AC line right in that harness right there. Alright, now we are getting ready to wire in the air conditioner power signal. And this is on, I believe, a C100 plug. And it'll be, looks like plug number 7 or wire 7, blue wire with a yellow tracer. So we're going to solder into this right now. Got this nicely soldered in, so we'll wrap it up and continue routing the rest of the wires. And here is the wiring harness that we made up. We'll just wrap it up with tape, connect to the battery with the fuse, go over, connect with the AC power, and then it'll all the wires will feed inside here. And Erik's new JL grill. Jealous. Making the ground and power cables for the actual fan, the Camaro fan. You need to know which one's the ground. Erik bought this kit where we can actually have a plug, factory plug, and keep that on there. If you don't want to do that, you can cut off this actual plug here. But to figure out which wire is the ground, this little nub right here, that is the side that the ground is on. So the other side would be the positive. And then that little one would be your trigger switch. So ground is where this nub is. And this is the kit number to get this switch, or to get this plug, and all these little fittings so you can make the fittings. So then we're going to change it since we have the 180-degree thermostat. The settings here is the start temperature, that's the low fan speed. It's 200 and it's 0 right here, so it's just 200. We're going to move this down to 190. That way the low speed will come on at 190. And then the high speed, that's the max speed on the fan. That's set to 220. We're going to lower this all the way down to 200. That way the max comes on at 200. This is only if you've got the 180-degree thermostat. So, alright, so we are getting ready to do the filling procedure on the transmission. So we jack up the rear end, that way the transmission pan sits level, and then we will be starting up the engine, and we'll have to get the transmission temperature up to temperature. We'll be pumping some in there, that way it's not running dry. And before we test started this engine, we did put about 5 quarts of oil is all that it would take before we actually started it up for its first test fire. So make sure you don't start up the transmission dry. Should take probably 9 quarts. So we need to make sure to check the temperature of the transmission. We need to warm it up. It needs to get to 86 degrees to 122 degrees. That's when you need to officially fill it up. So we need to use a phone app or a computer to see the temperature.
There's an actual good fill procedure on YouTube, and it does take putting the transmission into drive and allowing it to shift into second gear. So look this up on YouTube and follow that procedure for proper filling of the transmission.
We're thinking up front.
Oh, that's the coolant.
We can turn it off. That's just the coolant. Oh, where's the big bucket? Where's the big bucket? It's on the side of the house. So we gotta get to 86, and then we can fill it up. Well, hop out. I gotta put it in drive, and it's gotta go to second gear. Alright, so we got the transmission all filled. Took about 11 quarts. And this pump really made it a lot easier. Had to make sure it gets to temperature. And then, like I said, we have the back of the Jeep lifted up. That way the oil pan on the transmission is level. Then we'll just go back through and check over everything. Once we actually get this on the road, we'll have to recheck the transmission temperature, because right now there's no transmission fluid in the actual cooler.
Because the thermostat has not opened up yet.
So once it gets put in that cooler, we'll have to recheck it again and see how much needs to go into it. So, but for now, that's it. Erik?